They were laughing in the front row, mocking my moment in the sun. And I honestly thought I deserved it until the dean paused the ceremony to speak my name, silencing their cruelty forever. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the University of Southern California, painting the sprawling campus in hues of bruised purple and burning gold. It should have been the happiest day of my life, but as I stood backstage behind the heavy velvet curtains, I felt like I was waiting for an execution rather than a celebration. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that drowned out the low hum of the orchestra warming up. I smoothed the front of my black graduation gown, my palms slick with sweat, and adjusted the cap that sat atop my braided hair. I peeked through a slit in the curtain, scanning the sea of faces in the VIP section. It didn't take long to find them. My parents, Karen and Steve, were seated front and center. They stuck out, not just because of their prime seating, but because of their demeanor. They weren't looking at the program, or scanning the stage for their daughter. They were leaning toward each other, heads thrown back in raucous laughter, pointing at something on Steve's phone. A knot of familiar shame twisted in my gut. They were laughing. On my graduation day, for 22 years, this had been the dynamic. I was Jordan, the afterthought, the quiet black girl in a white family who preferred the solitude of the library to the chaos of the stadium. I was the one who never quite measured up to the legend of my older brother, Jake. Jake, the golden boy. Jake, the star quarterback, who had peaked in high school but was still treated like royalty at every family dinner. He wasn't even here today. He had business in Vegas, which probably meant he was gambling away the allowance Dad still sent him at 25. I remembered the day I got my acceptance letter to USC. I had run into the kitchen, waving the envelope, bursting with pride. Mom had barely looked up from her salad. "That's nice, Jordan," she had said, her tone flat. "But are you sure you can handle the tuition? We've just invested a lot in Jake's startup." They hadn't paid a dime. I had worked 3 jobs, taken out loans, and studied until my eyes burned to get here. I had earned every single credit, every single A, completely alone. The ceremony music swelled, signaling the start of the procession. I took my place in line, my stomach churning. As we filed onto the stage, the bright lights blinded me for a moment. When my vision cleared, I looked down at my parents again. They were still giggling, completely disengaged. It felt like a physical slap. Were they laughing at me? At my ambition? At the idea that I, the family charity case, could actually achieve something great? I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Don't let them ruin this," I told myself. "You worked too hard." The ceremony droned on. Name after name called out. I watched classmates wave to cheering families, saw fathers crying and mothers blowing kisses. I felt a pang of envy so sharp it nearly brought me to my knees. I had always lived in the shadows, the background character in the Karen and Steve show. But today, the script was about to flip. The dean of the university, a tall, imposing man with silver hair, stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, and the chatter in the audience died down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming. "We have many talented students here today, but every year, we select one student for the Dean's Award for Academic Excellence. This award goes to a student who has not only achieved a perfect GPA but has contributed significantly to the arts and literature of our community." I took a deep breath. This was it, the secret I had kept for months. "This year's recipient is a young woman of exceptional talent and resilience," the dean continued. "Please join me in congratulating Jordan Carter." The silence that followed was deafening for a split second before the polite applause began. I stepped out of the line and walked toward the center stage. My legs felt like jelly, but I held my head high. As I reached the podium, I looked directly at Karen and Steve. The laughter had vanished from their faces. It was replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Karen's mouth hung slightly open, her eyes wide. Steve looked like he had been struck by lightning. They froze, staring at me as if I were a stranger. They hadn't known. They hadn't asked. They didn't know I was top of my class. They didn't know I was the editor of the law review. They didn't know me. I accepted the heavy glass plaque from the dean, shaking his hand. I turned to the microphone, ready to give the speech I had practiced in front of my mirror for weeks. I wanted to thank my professors, my friends, the people who actually saw me. "Thank you, Dean," I began, my voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. When I started this journey, suddenly, movement in the back of the auditorium caught my eye. A woman stood up. She was striking, even from a distance, with a mane of fiery red hair that seemed to blaze under the house lights. She wasn't wearing graduation attire. She wore a trench coat and looked like she had been running. "Stop!" she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, cutting through the amplified sound of my speech. The audience gasped. The dean looked up, confused. "Excuse me, madam. Please sit down." "I will not sit down," the woman shouted, marching into the aisle. She pointed a shaking finger directly at the stage. Directly at me. "I need to speak. That girl, Jordan. She isn't who you think she is." My heart dropped into my stomach. The murmurs in the crowd grew into a roar of whispers. I looked at my parents. Steve was gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. Karen looked like she was about to faint. Panic, raw and terrifying, radiated off them. "I'm sorry," the red-haired woman yelled, her voice breaking with emotion. "But Jordan is not the daughter of Karen and Steve Carter. She is the daughter of my sister. They stole her. They abandoned my sister and stole her baby years ago." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Gasps filled the auditorium. My mind raced, trying to process the words. Stole? Not their daughter? I knew I was adopted, or at least, that's what they vaguely implied whenever I asked why I didn't look like them, but this was different. This was criminal. "I'm her aunt," the woman cried out, tears streaming down her face. "And I have been trying to find her for 22 years. I stood frozen on the stage, the plaque heavy in my hands. I looked at Karen and Steve again. They weren't looking at the woman, they were looking at me, and in their eyes, I didn't see confusion. I saw guilt. Deep, dark, terrified guilt. "Is this true?" I whispered into the microphone, my voice amplified across the silent stadium. "Why didn't you tell me?" Karen stood up, her hands shaking. "Jordan, honey, listen." "No!" I shouted, my voice cracking. A surge of power, fueled by years of neglect, rushed through my veins. "You laughed at me. You ignored me. And now you lie to me. Who am I? Who are you people?" The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The dean stepped forward to intervene. But it was too late. The perfectly constructed facade of my life had just shattered in front of 5,000 people. Just as the red-haired woman took another step toward the stage, the overhead lights flickered violently. Once, twice, and then the entire auditorium plunged into total, pitch-black darkness. Pause the video right now. If you have ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family, or if you've ever had to fight to be seen by the people who were supposed to love you, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Do it for the underdog in all of us. And I want you to comment down below, what city are you watching from right now? Let me know where my real family is. The darkness was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. For a terrifying 10 seconds, the only sounds were the confused murmurs of thousands of people and the high-pitched feedback of the microphones squealing in the black void. I stood paralyzed on the stage, clutching the award to my chest like a shield, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt exposed, a target standing in the center of a storm I didn't understand. Then, with a loud thrum, the stadium floodlights buzzed back to life, blinding me momentarily. I blinked rapidly, my eyes watering as the world came back into focus. The first thing I looked for was the red-haired woman. I scanned the aisle where she had been standing, my breath hitched in my throat. She was gone. The space she had occupied was empty, save for a few confused onlookers whispering to one another. It was as if she had been a hallucination, a specter conjured by my own desperate desire for the truth. But the heavy, suffocating tension in the air told me she was real. "Jordan!" The sharp bark of my father's voice snapped my head around. Steve and Karen were no longer in their seats. They had scrambled up the side stairs of the stage, ignoring the security guards trying to wave them back. Steve's face wasn't flushed with embarrassment anymore. It was pale, tight, and dangerous. Karen looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting around the stadium as if looking for an exit. "We're leaving," Steve hissed as he reached the podium, his hand shooting out to grab my upper arm. His grip was tight, painful, a stark contrast to the indifferent pats on the back I was used to. "Now, let go of me," I said, my voice low but steady. I tried to yank my arm back, but his fingers dug into my graduation gown, pinching the skin beneath. "It was a prank, Jordan," Karen stammered, breathless as she reached us. She forced a smile toward the audience, but it looked grotesque, more of a grimace. "Some sick prank by a crazy woman. We need to go home. We'll celebrate there." "A prank?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that frightened even me. You think I'm stupid? I saw your faces. You were terrified. I said move, Steve snarled, leaning in close so the audience couldn't hear. The mask of the suburban dad had slipped completely, revealing a cold, hard stranger beneath. You are making a scene. You are embarrassing the family. I'm done with this family, I spat. With a sudden, violent jerk, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp. The dean stepped forward, looking alarmed, positioning himself between me and Steve. Mr. Carter, I think you should step back, the dean warned, his voice authoritative. Taking advantage of the distraction, I turned and ran. I didn't go back to my seat. I didn't wait for the ceremony to end. I sprinted across the stage, my gown billowing behind me, and dashed down the back stairs toward the dressing rooms. I needed to get out. I needed air. I needed answers. I burst into the quiet backstage corridor, my lungs burning. I fumbled for my phone in the pocket of my dress, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I needed to call a cab, call the police, call someone. As I unlocked the screen, a notification popped up at the very top. It was a text message from an unknown number, received just moments ago while the lights were out. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a text. It was a photo. It was a picture of a birth certificate. My birth certificate. But the name wasn't Jordan Carter. It was Jordan Freeman. And listed under mother was a name I didn't know, and under father the space was blank. Below the image was a single line of text. Don't go home with them. They aren't going to take you to the house. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred, the name Jordan Freeman searing itself into my mind. The implications of the text were terrifying, but the warning below it was what spurred me into motion. They aren't going to take you to the house. If they weren't taking me home, where were they taking me? She went this way. I saw the gown. A security guard's voice echoed down the concrete corridor, accompanied by the heavy, angry footsteps of my father. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. I couldn't be found. Not now. I ripped off the graduation cap and threw it into a pile of folding chairs. The gown was next. I struggled with the zipper, the fabric tangling around my arms, until I finally tore it off, leaving it in a crumpled heap on the floor. Now, in just my white sundress, I felt vulnerable, but at least I wasn't wearing a beacon. I didn't take the main exit. I knew Steve. He would have the front doors covered. He was a man who controlled variables, and right now, I was the variable he had lost control of. I spotted a red exit sign above a heavy steel door at the end of the hall. I sprinted toward it, my heels clicking loudly on the linoleum. I kicked them off, grabbing them in one hand, and ran barefoot. I burst through the door and spilled out into the loading dock behind the auditorium. The evening air was cooling, but I was sweating profusely. I stayed low, hugging the brick wall, moving toward the faculty parking lot where Steve always insisted on parking. He liked the status of it. I needed to see if they were leaving. I needed to know if the text was real or just another layer of this nightmare. Peering around the corner of a dumpster, I saw it. The silver Mercedes SUV. It was idling, the engine purring menacingly. Steve was standing by the open trunk, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing wildly. Karen was sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, looking like a statue. I crept closer, using the rows of parked cars as cover, until I was close enough to hear Steve's voice over the hum of the engine. Plan B. Steve growled into the phone. The little ungrateful brat made a scene. The aunt showed up. Yes, her. I don't know how she found us. He paused, listening to the person on the other end, his face twisted into a scowl. No, we aren't going back to the estate, he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper that carried on the wind. She knows too much. We're taking her straight to the facility in Nevada, the one for troubled youth. We'll sedate her if we have to. Just have the paperwork ready for an involuntary commitment. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. A facility? Sedation? They were planning to lock me away. They were going to make me disappear to protect their secrets. The text had been right. I turned to run, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. I needed to get to the police station. I needed to get off this campus. But as I spun around, crouched low between two sedans, I slammed directly into a solid wall of black fabric. Strong arms wrapped around me instantly, pinning my arms to my sides. I opened my mouth to scream, to alert anyone, even Steve, but a leather-gloved hand clamped tight over my face, smothering the sound. Quiet. A deep, gravelly voice whispered in my ear. Unless you want to end up in that trunk. I struggled, kicking out, but the grip was ironclad. I was dragged backward into the shadows of a large van I hadn't noticed before. As the side door slid open, I saw a familiar flash of fiery red hair in the driver's seat. "Get her in," the woman said, "before he sees us." The heavy sliding door slammed shut with a metallic finality, sealing us in the gloom of the van's interior. The man released me immediately, holding his large, leather-gloved hands up in a gesture of surrender. I scrambled backward over the bench seats, pressing my back against the rear window, my chest heaving as I looked around for anything I could use as a weapon. "Don't touch me," I screamed, grabbing a loose tire iron from the floor. "Let me out." "We aren't going to hurt you, Jordan," the man said. He was older, maybe 50, with a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and a distinct military bearing. "We just saved your life." "Hold on!" the red-haired woman yelled from the front. The van lurched forward violently, tires screeching against the asphalt. I was thrown sideways, hitting my shoulder hard against the metal frame. I groaned but pulled myself up, looking out the tinted back window. In the distance, I saw Steve running toward the loading dock where I had been standing just seconds ago. He stopped, looking around wildly, then kicked a trash can over in a fit of rage. We had missed him by mere seconds. "Who are you people?" I demanded, my voice trembling but loud. "You kidnapped me!" "We rescued you," the woman said, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. They were green, startlingly bright against her pale skin eyes that looked hauntingly like my own reflection. "I'm Vivian. Your mother's sister. And that's Silas. He used to work private security for the people who raised you." "Used to?" I asked, gripping the seat in front of me to steady myself as the van wove through traffic. "Until I found out what they were planning for today," Silas grunted, shifting his position to watch the road behind us. "Steve and Karen aren't just rich parents, kid. They run a network. If they took you to that facility in Nevada, you wouldn't be a patient, you'd be a prisoner, indefinitely." My stomach turned. The conversation I overheard in the parking lot replayed in my mind. Involuntary commitment. Sedate her. "I want to go to the police," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Drop me at the precinct." Vivian laughed. A dry, bitter sound. "The police commissioner was sitting 2 rows behind your parents at graduation. Who do you think expedited the paperwork for your commitment? You can't trust the system when your parents own it." The hopelessness of the situation washed over me. I was trapped in a moving vehicle with strangers, fleeing the only people I had ever known. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Safe house," Vivian said, taking a sharp turn that sent us onto the highway on-ramp. "We have a lot to explain. About your real mother. About why they took you. About the inheritance." "Inheritance?" I blinked. "I don't have any money. They paid for everything." "You're not a charity case, Jordan," Silas said, his eyes narrowing as he stared out the back window. "You're the heir to a fortune they've been siphoning off for 2 decades. Why do you think Jake has a startup? It's funded by your trust fund." My jaw dropped. Every unpaid bill, every student loan, every moment I felt like a burden, it was all a lie. They had been stealing from me to fund their golden child. Suddenly, Silas stiffened. He leaned closer to the glass, his body tense as a coiled spring. "Vivian," he barked, his voice dropping an octave. "Punch it." "What is it?" she asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We've got company," Silas said, reaching inside his jacket. "And it's not the Mercedes, it's a black SUV, no plates. They aren't trying to pull us over." I looked back and saw a dark vehicle swerve aggressively through traffic, gaining on us fast. The passenger window of the pursuing SUV rolled down, and I saw something metallic glint in the setting sun, the long barrel of a rifle. "Get down!" Silas roared, lunging to cover me just as the back window shattered into 1,000 diamonds. I curled into a ball on the floor of the van, covering my head with my arms as the world erupted into chaos. The wind roared through the shattered back window, carrying with it the terrifying pop-pop-pop of gunfire. Shards of safety glass rained down on us like hail. "Keep your head down," Silas roared, bracing himself against the swaying frame of the van. He didn't fire back. He just kept his body positioned between me and the open window, a human shield against the bullets. "I can't shake them," Vivian screamed from the front, wrestling with the steering wheel as the van fishtailed violently. "They've got a souped-up engine. They're going to ram us." "Take the interchange," Silas barked. "The construction zone. Go now." Vivian didn't hesitate. She yanked the wheel to the right, sending us careening across 3 lanes of traffic. Horns blared around us as we cut off a semi-truck, the driver slamming on his brakes in a cloud of burning rubber. The black SUV followed, relentless, mirroring our movements like a shadow. We hit the off-ramp at 80 miles per hour. Ahead, orange barrels and concrete barriers narrowed the road into a single, tight lane. "Thread the needle, Viv," Silas muttered, gripping the grab handle. Vivian gunned the engine. We shot through the gap between 2 concrete barriers with inches to spare. The black SUV, wider and moving too fast to correct, couldn't make the cut. I heard a sickening crunch of metal against concrete, followed by the screech of tearing steel. I dared to lift my head just enough to peek over the seat. The SUV had wedged itself against the barrier, steam billowing from its hood. "We lost them," I breathed, my voice trembling. Vivian didn't slow down. She navigated the van through a maze of industrial warehouses, her hands shaking on the wheel. "That was too close. They weren't trying to capture you, Jordan. They were shooting to kill." "Why?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Why would my parents want me dead?" Silas turned to me, brushing glass off his jacket. His expression was grim. "Because if you're dead, the trust fund doesn't revert to you at 22. It stays under the control of the trustees, Steve and Karen." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, handheld device with an antenna. He flipped a switch, and it began to emit a low, rhythmic clicking sound. "What is that?" I asked. "RF detector," Silas said, scanning the interior of the van. "They found us too fast at the school. Steve isn't smart enough to track a burner phone this quickly. There's a bug." He waved the wand over the dashboard, the seats, and the floor. The clicking remained steady. Then, he turned the device toward me. The clicking sped up. "Click, click, click, click." "It's on you," Silas said, his eyes narrowing. I changed my clothes," I stammered, looking down at my sundress. "I'm not wearing anything they gave me." Silas moved the wand closer. It shrieked when it hovered over my chest. He reached out and grabbed the silver locket, hanging around my neck, a gift from Karen the morning of graduation. She had insisted I wear it for good luck. "This," Silas growled. He yanked the chain, snapping the clasp, and threw the locket out the shattered window. The clicking stopped. "We need to ditch the van," Vivian said, pulling into an abandoned alleyway. "Switch to the backup car." We scrambled out of the van. My legs felt like lead. As I stepped onto the pavement, Silas grabbed my arm, stopping me dead in my tracks. He was looking at his own phone, his face draining of color. "What?" Vivian asked, popping the trunk of a rusted sedan parked nearby. "We have a problem," Silas said, turning the screen toward us. It was a live news broadcast. My face was plastered across the screen. The headline in bold red letters read, "Breaking news. Armed kidnapping at USC graduation. Suspects identified as estranged aunt and ex-employee. Victim, Jordan Carter." They flipped the narrative. Silas whispered, "We aren't rescuers anymore, kid. We're the most wanted fugitives in the state." We abandoned the luxury SUV for a rusted beige sedan that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and motor oil. Silas drove, hunched over the wheel, sticking to the back alleys and service roads of Los Angeles, navigating the city like a ghost. "Where are we going?" I asked from the back seat, my voice hollow. I watched the city blur by, a place that felt foreign to me now. My face was on every news channel, branded a victim of a kidnapping that was actually a rescue. "To see the reason you're in this mess," Vivian said softly from the passenger seat. She turned to look at me, her expression softening. "To see your mother." "My mother," I repeated, the words tasting strange. "Karen told me my biological mother was a drug addict who left me at a fire station." That was the story. "Karen is a liar," Silas grunted from the front, his eyes checking the mirrors every few seconds. "Your mother is Elena. She's an artist. A brilliant one. And she never touched drugs, but she had money, old money. When your grandfather died, he left everything to Elena and her future children, Steve and Karen. They were just the executors. They had her committed," Vivian added, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Postpartum depression. They used it. They paid off a judge, had her declared incompetent, and placed her in a facility. Then they took you. As long as they had custody of the heir, they had control of the trust. They've been bleeding your inheritance dry for 22 years, to fund their lifestyle and pay off Jake's gambling debts. I felt sick. The investments in Jake's startups, the lavish parties, the vacation homes, it was all my money. It was my mother's money. She escaped 2 weeks ago, Silas said, turning onto a dirt road that wound up into the hills, away from the city lights. That's why the Dean's Award mattered. We knew you'd be on stage. It was the only time we could get to you publicly before they moved you to Nevada. We pulled up to a small, secluded cabin surrounded by dense pine trees. It looked dark, quiet, a perfect hiding spot. She's inside, Vivian said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Her hands were shaking with anticipation. She's been waiting for this moment since the day they took you. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was about to meet the woman whose absence had shaped my entire life. I opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. The silence of the woods was unnerving after the chaos of the city. Elena, Vivian called out, rushing toward the front porch. We have her. We're here. There was no answer. Silas frowned, stepping out of the car slowly, his hand moving to the holster under his jacket. Vivian. Wait. But Vivian was already at the door. She tried the handle. It was unlocked. She pushed it open, and the creak echoed loudly in the stillness. Elena? I followed them, stepping onto the porch. Silas pushed past me, his gun drawn now, moving with tactical precision. He entered the cabin first. Clear, he whispered, but his tone was wrong. It wasn't relieved. It was horrified. I stepped into the living room. The place had been tossed. Furniture was overturned, lamps smashed, and books scattered across the floor. It looked like a tornado had touched down inside the small room. No, Vivian gasped, falling to her knees beside an overturned armchair. No. 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 I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. There was no sign of Elena. But there was something else. On the far wall, pinned to the drywall with a jagged steak knife, was a piece of paper. I walked toward it, my breath catching in my throat. It was a page from a sketchbook, a beautiful, charcoal drawing of a baby me. But scrawled across the drawing in thick black marker were 3 words that made my blood freeze. Trade for Jake. Trade for Jake, I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I pulled the knife from the wall, the paper fluttering to the floor. What does this mean? Who has her? Vivian was sobbing into her hands, but Silas was already in motion, kicking through the debris, checking the back rooms. He returned a moment later, his face grim. No sign of a struggle at the entry points. They had a key. Or she opened the door for them. It means they're desperate, Silas said, looking at the note. The business in Vegas. Jake isn't just gambling. He's in deep with loan sharks. Big ones. Steve and Karen are tapped out. They've drained your trust as much as they can without your signature. But now the sharks are circling. The pieces clicked together like a horrifying puzzle. My parents weren't just greedy. They were trying to save their golden child from the consequences of his own actions. And I was the sacrificial lamb. I was just a walking checkbook to them. They have Elena, Vivian choked out, wiping her eyes. Steve knows we'd come here. He knew I'd bring you to her. It was a setup from the start. We have to call the police, I said, though the suggestion felt weak even as I said it. No police, Silas barked. You saw the news. We're the kidnappers now. If we call the cops, they storm this place, find us armed, and shoot us. Meanwhile, Steve disappears with Elena and claims he rescued her from us. So what do we do? I asked, my voice rising. We can't just leave her. We don't leave her, Silas said, checking the magazine of his pistol. We make the trade. No, Vivian screamed. Jordan, you can't go back to them. They'll lock you up forever. I'm not going back to be their daughter, I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. I reached into Silas's jacket pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I'm going back to finish this. I dialed the number I had known by heart since I was 6 years old. My father's private line. It rang once. Hello, Jordan. Steve's voice answered. He sounded calm, almost bored. It chilled me to the bone. Where is she? I demanded. She's comfortable. For now, Steve said. But my associates are losing patience regarding Jake's debt. I need you to sign some papers, Jordan. A full transfer of power of attorney. Do that, and you can take your crazy aunt and your birth mother and go live in a cardboard box for all I care. Where? I asked. The old textile factory in downtown, he said. The one grandfather left to the family. Midnight. Come alone. Or rather, come with your bodyguards. But tell Silas if I see a sniper rifle. Elena bleeds. The line went dead. I looked at Silas. The textile factory. Midnight. Silas nodded, his jaw set tight. I know it. It's a kill box. Open floor plan. Catwalks. Minimal cover. They'll have the high ground. We have 2 hours, I said. Do we have a plan? Silas walked over to a duffel bag he had stashed in the trunk of the beige sedan. He unzipped it, revealing a small arsenal of flashbangs, smoke grenades, and extra ammunition. Yeah, Silas said, handing me a heavy Kevlar vest. We go in loud, and we don't play by their rules. We drove in silence, the city lights growing brighter as we descended from the hills. The factory loomed ahead, a skeletal beast of brick and broken glass against the night sky. We parked blocks away and moved in on foot, sticking to the shadows. Silas signaled for us to stop near a rusted side entrance. He peeked through a grime-encrusted window. I have eyes on the target, he whispered into his headset, though only Vivian and I were listening. I crept up beside him and looked through the glass. The factory floor was illuminated by a single, harsh construction light. In the center, tied to a wooden chair, was a woman who looked so much like me it stole my breath away. Elena. She was battered, her head hanging low. Standing over her wasn't Steve, it wasn't Karen. It was a young man in a varsity jacket, holding a canister of gasoline in one hand and a lighter in the other. He was pacing nervously, his eyes manic. Jake, I breathed. He's not being held hostage, Silas whispered, his voice turning to ice. He's the executioner. The smell of gasoline hit me before I even stepped through the rusted metal doors, acrid, sharp, and terrifying. It mingled with the damp rot of the abandoned factory, creating a stench of impending death. He's unstable, Silas whispered, checking the safety on his pistol one last time. Jake is a user. He's jittery. If we startle him, he drops that lighter, and your mother burns. I need you to be the distraction. Walk in, keep his eyes on you. Vivian and I will flank from the catwalks. I can do this, I said, though my hands were shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists. Wait for my signal, Silas said, his eyes locking onto mine. When I kill the lights, you drop to the floor. Understood? I nodded and pushed the heavy door open. The screech of the hinges echoed through the cavernous space like a scream. Jake spun around, the lighter in his hand flickering dangerously. He looked terrible, eyes sunken, skin pale and clammy, twitching with nervous energy. Stay back, Jake screamed, splashing a fresh wave of gasoline onto the floor around Elena's chair. My mother looked up, her eyes groggy but filled with terror. A gag was tied tight around her mouth. Jake, stop, I said, stepping into the circle of light. I held my hands up, showing him I was unarmed. You don't want to do this. You're not a murderer. You don't know what I am, Jake yelled, his voice cracking. I owe them, Jordan. If I don't pay up by tomorrow, they're going to break my legs. I need that trust fund. So you'd kill our mother for it? I asked, taking a slow step forward. She's not my mother, Jake spat. She's just an incubator for the cash cow. That's you, Jordan. You're just the bank. A slow clapping sound emerged from the shadows behind the industrial looms. Steve and Karen stepped into the light. Steve looked immaculate in his suit, seemingly unbothered by the filth of the factory, holding a leather folder. Karen looked bored, checking her watch. Touching family reunion, Steve said, his voice smooth and cold. Now, let's cut the theatrics. The papers are right here, Jordan. Sign over the trust. Backdate the transfer of power. And we all walk away. Well, most of us. Let her go first, I demanded, glancing toward the rafters where Silas should be. Sign first, Steve countered, tossing the folder onto the gasoline-soaked floor at my feet. Then I call off Jake. I slowly bent down to pick up the folder. I needed to buy time. I opened it, pretending to read the legal jargon. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Come on, Silas. Now. I need a pen, I said, looking up. Here, Karen said, tossing a pen at me. It clattered on the concrete. I stood up, holding the pen. I looked directly at Steve. You never loved me, not for 1 second. Love is a poor investment, Steve shrugged, Return on investment is all that matters. Now, Silas, I screamed, dropping to the floor. I waited for the gunshot. I waited for the lights to die. I waited for the chaos. But the lights stayed on. The factory remained silent, save for the hum of the generator. I looked up from the cold concrete, confused. Steve was smiling. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a predator's grin. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, black radio. Silas? Steve spoke into the radio, his eyes never leaving mine. Why don't you join the party? From the darkness of the catwalks above, a heavy object was shoved over the railing. It plummeted 20 feet and crashed onto the factory floor with a sickening thud, rolling to a stop just feet from where I lay. It was Silas. He was unconscious, blood matted in his gray hair, zip-tied hand and foot. Steve laughed. A dry, rattling sound. Did you really think I'd hire a security team that didn't know how to handle my former employee? We've been waiting for you, Jordan. Jake flicked the lighter, the flame dancing eagerly. Time's up, sis. Sign or burn. Have you ever trusted someone to have your back, only to realize you were walking into a trap alone? We are approaching the finale. If your jaw dropped when Silas fell, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the ending of this twisted family saga. Leave a comment. Team Jordan, if you think she can make it out. Or game over if you think Steve has won. I stared at Silas's motionless body, a lump of dread forming in my throat that felt heavy enough to choke me. The one person who knew how to fight was down. My mother was tied to a chair in a pool of gasoline, and my brother, eyes wide and manic, held the power to incinerate us all with a flick of his thumb. I'm waiting, Jordan, Steve said, checking his watch as if this were a board meeting that was running late. Sign the papers. Don't make me tell Jake to drop that lighter. He's very clumsy when he's nervous. Just do it, Jake screamed. His hand trembling so violently the flame of the lighter danced like a frantic firefly. I need the money tonight. I looked at Karen. She was inspecting her fingernails, completely detached from the fact that she was about to watch her biological child burn alive. These people weren't just cruel. They were empty. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I gripped the pen until my knuckles turned white. I'll sign. I'll sign. I took a step forward, careful not to slip on the slick concrete. I looked at Jake, locking eyes with him. I needed to get close. I needed to bridge the gap between the gasoline and safety. I'm signing, Jake, I said softly, inching closer. But you know they won't pay your debts, right? Jake blinked, sweat dripping down his forehead. What? Stop talking, Jordan, Steve barked, raising his voice. They used me for 22 years, I continued, ignoring Steve, keeping my eyes glued to Jake. They hid me to keep the money. Now they're using you to get it back. Once I sign this, they have the trust. They don't need you anymore. Do you really think Steve is going to hand over $5 million to a loan shark for you? Jake's expression wavered. The lighter lowered slightly. He looked at Steve. Dad? You said you had the cash ready. I do, son, Steve said, his smile tight and predatory. Don't listen to her. She's desperate. He's lying, I pressed, taking another step. I was 5 feet away from him now. Look at him, Jake. He's looking at you like a liability, not a son. Shut up, Karen shrieked, her mask finally cracking. Steve, shoot her. Just shoot her and forge the signature. Steve pulled a suppressed pistol from his jacket, leveling it at my chest. Plan B it is. I froze. I had pushed too far. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the darkness of the rafters above, directly over the fuse box on the far wall. Steve's eyes darted upward. I thought you swept the catwalks, he yelled at the shadows. We missed the aunt, a voice crackled over Steve's radio. You missed a lot of things, Vivian's voice screamed from the darkness above. A heavy wrench came hurtling down from the black void, smashing directly into the main industrial breaker box on the wall. Sparks bright, hot, and blue exploded in a shower of electrical fury. The factory lights died instantly, plunging us into pitch blackness. But the darkness only lasted a second. The shower of sparks rained down onto the concrete floor. One single, glowing ember landed in the pool of gasoline surrounding my mother's chair. Whoosh! The air was sucked out of the room as a wall of orange flame erupted, separating me from Steve and Karen. The heat was instantaneous and searing. I was on the inside of the ring of fire. But I wasn't alone. Jake was on my side of the flames, screaming, dropping the lighter as he scrambled backward. And trapped in the center of the inferno, eyes wide with terror, was my mother. "Jordan!" Steve's voice roared from behind the wall of fire. "You die in there!" I looked around frantically. The fire was spreading fast, eating the oxygen, climbing the walls. The exit was blocked by flames. We were trapped. The heat was a physical weight, pressing against my lungs, searing my skin. The fire roared like a living beast, consuming the oxygen in the room. Through the shimmering waves of heat, I saw Steve and Karen backing away toward the exit, their faces twisted in a mix of fear and cold indifference. They were leaving us to burn. "Mom!" I screamed, diving through the smoke toward the chair. I fell to my knees beside Elena, my hands frantically tearing at the ropes binding her wrists. The knots were tight, soaked in gasoline. "Jordan, go!" Elena rasped, her eyes filled with tears. "Save yourself." "Not without you," I coughed, smoke filling my throat. Above us, the mechanical whine of a heavy industrial hoist cut through the roar of the fire. A thick steel chain descended rapidly from the darkness of the rafters, swinging wildly. Vivian was operating the crane from the control booth above. "Hook her up," Vivian screamed over the din. I grabbed the heavy steel hook. "Jake!" I yelled, looking at my brother who was cowering near the edge of the flames. "Help me!" Jake looked at the exit where Steve had just disappeared, then back at me. He looked at the fire that was inches from consuming us. The realization hit him he was disposable. To Steve, he was just loose change. With a primal scream, Jake lunged forward. He didn't run for the door. He grabbed the other side of Elena's chair. Together, we hoisted her up, looping the chain under her arms and securing it. "Take her up," I signaled to Vivian. Elena was lifted into the air, away from the inferno, sobbing as she reached down for me. "Jordan!" Steve's voice boomed. He had returned to the doorway, his gun raised, aiming at me through the wall of fire. "You don't get to win!" I froze. There was nowhere to run. But before he could pull the trigger, a shadow moved on the floor behind him. Silas. Bloody, battered, and barely conscious. Silas had dragged himself upright. With the last of his strength, he swung a heavy metal pipe into the back of Steve's knees. Steve crumpled with a howl of pain, the gun skittering across the concrete into the flames. At that moment, the factory doors burst open. Blue and red lights flooded the smoky room, cutting through the orange glow. "Police! Drop to the ground!" The cavalry had arrived. 2 months later, the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and purple as my graduation day. But this time, I wasn't watching it from a backstage curtain, hiding in the shadows. I was sitting on the deck of a beach house in Malibu, my house. Steve and Karen were awaiting trial without bail. The charges ranged from kidnapping to attempted murder and fraud. Jake was in a minimum security facility, cooperating with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had finally stopped running. I looked over at the easel set up on the deck. Elena was there, painting the seascape, her red hair blowing in the breeze. She looked healthy, happy, and free. Vivian was inside, arguing with Silas about what to put on the grill, their laughter drifting out through the open door. I looked down at the new birth certificate in my hands. Jordan Freeman. I had lost the parents who raised me, but I had found the family who loved me. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a survivor. I took a deep breath of the salty air. The nightmare was over. My real life had just begun.